Okay, that was a little extreme. The town of Bridgewater, Nova Scotia might not be the next location of an up-and-coming Netflix mockumentary, but it's still a pretty spectacular place and one of our favorite communities in all of the province. Not just because of their beautiful riverside scenery or their peaceful South Shore lifestyle, but because they have one of the most unique transit systems in Nova Scotia. We decided to do a little road trip to find out more about it. To start us off, let's address the bus on the road. Why exactly does this town of less than 9,000 people need a transit system anyways?
Not everyone has an easy way to get around town, and we definitely see that here. Not everyone has a personal vehicle. They have to spend a lot of money on cabs, or they have to ask for rides from other people, or they have to walk a really long distance to work. So having this system in place really just makes transportation around town a lot more accessible to a lot more people. Not everyone has the ability to go to work as easily or go to the doctors, go pick up groceries, and I think that's really important. Another thing that we saw happen with Bridgewater Transit is just creating that social connectedness, and think that that is one of the most important things about a local transit system.
I think building off what Mackenzie has already talked about, that we have to recognize that not everybody has access to a personal vehicle. Not everybody is making a choice to have a personal vehicle either, and that there's a lot of different ways that people need to and would like to move around our community. The transit service is really that next sort of a step up in freedom for people to be able to move around to do the things that they need to do in their daily life. One thing that we didn't count on when we started on this journey was how much youth would use the bus. And the daycares immediately became a regular user of our transit service, and suddenly they were able to get to parts of town that they couldn't get to before and expose the kids in those programs to places and opportunities in our town that previously were unavailable to them. And it's been pretty amazing to see. So our bus really is about providing, I know all the car ads are about the freedom that you can go wherever you want, but the bus is also freedom too.
Clearly, staff was very passionate about improving the lives of Bridgewaterites, Bridgewaterans, Bridgies, doesn't matter. But just because you know you need a transit system doesn't mean one will appear overnight. It takes a lot of hard work, and you know what? Mackenzie can do a much better job of telling this than I can.
We had the feasibility study done before the service was launched, and that was where a lot of our kind of baseline information and planning came from. So they gave us options for potential routes, the type of routes, whether it was fixed route or flexed, what kind of bus, what fare options would be good. So we got a lot of that from the feasibility study and then kind of tweaked it based on the knowledge that we had of our community. So we originally ran a 6-month pilot project for Bridgewater Transit to see how it was going to work. It was pretty similar in structure to what we have now, so the route, the service hours, the days of the week, everything like that was quite similar. But I think one of the main things that we learned is just how to operate a transit system. So a lot of the planning was in the implementation phase beforehand, and a lot of the operational details came about in that 6-month period. Another thing that we realized is that 6 months is really not long enough to figure out if transit is going to work in a community.
After months and months of work and dedication, Bridgewater did it. They created a transit system that fits into the lifestyle and geography of their town. So how exactly does Bridgewater Transit work?
Our system is tricky to navigate because as sort of a baby system, I'll call it, it is a single bus, single loop, single direction. Oftentimes, you do the calculation and you realize, well, it'll get me from my house to the movie theater in like 10 minutes, which is great. It saves me a 35-minute walk. But it will take me 45 minutes to get home, so I'll do the 25-minute walk. With a service like ours, which is a hourly loop, we can't have flexibility and coverage kind of all at the same time. We balance that with having some flag stops as well as some set stops to figure out where people want to get on the bus, where we might not already have a stop, but also just to make it easier for people to take the bus. We were able to do that, and then one of the biggest hurdles that we found was actually scheduling it to make it work for as many people as possible. Few aspects around the scheduling. So what we did is we gathered some information from employers to see when there were start and stop times of different shifts. We looked at when school started. We looked at things like that to determine when the bus on the route should be in certain places. And from there, we have stops that the bus has to be there at a certain time and it can't leave before then. So these time stops enable the bus to stay on track. And they end up waiting there for a couple minutes if they're a little bit early, but they're not allowed to leave before. And so it keeps a consistent schedule.
Bridgewater Transit might be small in size, but even a small transit system has a lot of moving parts to address. There's cost, there's revenue, there's technical know-how. So how did they, and still do, address all of these issues? Take it away, Jessica.
Municipalities in Nova Scotia are in a unique position where the Municipal Government Act allows us to bypass the public utilities component if we're providing service wholly within our municipal boundary. And this is a service to our residents. This is what we learned from Yarmouth. They said, stay in your boundaries and you can do whatever you want. So the biggest hurdle was to figure out the legislative landscape and then figure out what permissions we needed.
So there are definitely some capital barriers to transit. One of the biggest spends, of course, is the buses, but a lot of it also comes in to play with driver salaries. We were really lucky in that we had Halifax Transit very kindly donate some end-of-life buses to us, so we've actually been able to use them up until this point for about 3 years, which has just made the system possible. We also were able to get funding throughout different parts of the service, so we had certain funding for the pilot project, we had funding for the implementation phase as well, and I think one of the key takeaways from that is just having council and staff who are really passionate about it and trying to find ways to get funding and make this succeed, because it is a really important service.
We had targets that we were hoping to hit, and that would get us a certain percentage of the fare box. The rest we knew was going to have to come from the tax rate. So the communication with the public was that convincing that this is a public service like recreation, like healthcare. So if I use healthcare for example, doctors, hospitals cost us hundreds of millions of dollars a year, but we would never say, I don't want to pay for that in my taxes because for the community's good, we need them. I don't think transit is any different, right? That movement of people, regardless of their income level, is vital to a community like ours. And so as soon as council saw it that way, and then the public saw it that way, it has been more than 2 years since I've had an email from someone worried about transit on the tax rate. That message has been received loud and clear that it's a service and it's going to be paid for by taxes.
The continued support of the other transit services around the province, so Yarmouth Transit, King's Transit, Halifax Transit, those 3 services in particular were instrumental in getting us up and running, but also in helping us continue through operations. A few of us, the Director of Engineering, our Strategic Initiatives Coordinator, and myself did a road trip down to Yarmouth before we started the bus, just to listen to them, learn about their system, and I got a piece of advice at a workshop in March from the manager of King's Transit. I had never met him at the time, and I was at the coffee break, and he said, "Oh, you're Bridgewater. You need 2 buses." By the way, my name is Steve. Like, I did not know who he was. He said, you need 2 buses, and then he sat down and he explained with me why. That was transformational, because we had never considered that. But he said, every bus, even a new bus, is in the shop at some point. And how are you going to provide that continuity and be that regular and reliable service if your bus is off the road? And then we talked to Yarmouth, who only had 1 bus, and they said, oh, if only we had a backup bus. So everything was, the support of those networks was transformational. Otherwise, we would have picked something not knowing anything about a transit service, and we would have been unreliable from the start. Another key ingredient to our success is not relying on technology. When we talked to King's, they gave us literally like a 6-button clicker. We track a tremendous amount of information about our riders. How many people are just paying a cash fare? How many people are using our passes? How many people have a mobility aid and need to use the wheelchair lift? So that we can look back from day 1 of our service and we know, is it youth, is it adults? We know all these different things about who's riding our bus, and that's not a technology piece. We were told you could get it through technology, but we went with just doing something very simple.
That's a lot of work and dedication to make a transit system. But as both Jessica and Mackenzie have said, having a local transit system goes a long way in improving the accessibility of your community. But that's not all it does. Let's face it, this wouldn't be a Plan of Facts video unless we at least talked a little bit about the fact that transit also makes your community healthier and more sustainable.
Active transportation and public transportation go hand in hand, and we actually have some regular users of our transit system go to their destination and then bike home at the end of the day, or people who take the bus to work and then walk home at the end of the day, or vice versa. I think that the bus really helps lessen, especially in Bridgewater with hills on both sides of the river valley, it helps lessen the mental math you do when you calculate how long is it going to take me to walk there, or I want to get a walk in and I could take the bus and then walk back. Our community energy investment plan also envisions a mode shift between now and 2050, and it's not dramatic, primarily because of our weather conditions, our topography, and things like that that do make it a little bit more challenging for some people, especially if they're not fully healthy or maybe have a slight mobility issue or something like that. Then that bus really adds to what people can do.
So although switching from automobiles to using the transit service isn't necessarily one of our main driving factors, it is important, and we really do want to see high ridership because that's what's going to create a good service and make it something that people want to use and have the ability to use and be able to do improvements. We did really work on incentivizing people to use the transit system at the beginning, especially when we're a place that hasn't had a public transit system like this before. So we started off by having 3 weeks of free transit right at the beginning, just to let people go on and see if they like it and try it out without having to pay anything and get more comfortable with it. We also kept up promotions a lot, especially during the pilot project and then even afterwards. So it might be celebrating milestones or doing free transit on the anniversary of the system, things like that, to just keep people aware that this service exists and try and promote people to go on it, and again, without having to pay to try it out for the first time.
Bridgewater Transit is a fantastic system. It's an excellent example of how, with a little bit of hard work and dedication, you can make your community more accessible, healthy, and sustainable. It's something we hope more towns and municipalities strive to achieve. If you're still wondering why you should work towards providing your residents with a transit system, well, we'll leave you with one final message from the Town of Bridgewater's mayor.
So if you have a story like we have in town with a gentleman who is disabled, whose parents need to get him around town, but then along comes the bus and he regains that independence and not relying on his parents to be his transit system. So if you are those parents, what is the value of that? It's priceless in nature. So if you take that story and multiply it by other people who are not able-bodied, who can access transit, seniors that may have lost their ability to drive but now can remain independent in their home because of transit, all these things have a dollar associated to them, not on the balance sheet of the town's budget, but to those people, right? So for my father who had Alzheimer's and passed away before the bus was active, he would have been able to take advantage, because of where he lived in town, of transit. And for me, it would have been priceless. So that's the component that people really need to think of when they think of transit. Focus on that benefit as a service, not as just a line item in the budget. Then I think you'd see more action on transit, especially in urban centers or between urban centers. But you have to get past that, it's going to cost money. Yes, it's going to cost money, but what's it worth? They have to get past that, and then you'll see transit.